self-trust. Let's see. Self-trust. This is my own personal definition as far as like how I understand it, how I work with this concept. But I'm going to say self-trust is being able to trust your own inner guidance to know the right answer for yourself. Also, trusting that you will land on your feet regardless of external circumstances. So self-trust is not exactly the same thing, but it is very similar to the concept of assertive versus turbulent. So that assertive and turbulent is not part of classic Myers-Briggs, but when you take the Myers-Briggs test through the 16 Personalities website, like I had you guys do for this course, then you get to see your assertive versus turbulent score at the bottom as part of your overall type. And it's really awesome actually when you go into YouTube and start searching for like INFP, for example. If you search for INFP-A or INFP-T, you'll find content geared even more deeply towards like not only an INFP, but if you're more assertive or if you're more turbulent. So what that might look like in your overall personality. So this concept of self-trust, it begins, and again, this is kind of my own thought process. This is what makes sense to me. So as an uncertified professional, take it with a grain of salt into your own system. But self-trust begins in early life with how friendly the world was to us when we arrived. How much autonomy our parents helped us cultivate, along with the safety net that they provided. A lot of factors set us up to be able to trust ourselves in the world or not. And I do genuinely believe that it really does come back to our sense of inner safety. And if you don't feel safe, it's going to be really difficult to trust yourself. And so that's just a little bit about the mechanics of like how self-trust works. And this spectrum of assertive and turbulent gives us the perfect ground to foster this conversation. And there's a word that we're going to bring into it to help us understand what exactly assertive and turbulent is trying to measure. And that word is neurosis. So neurosis, I knew nothing about neurosis except for that it has a negative connotation around it. It is mostly an insult. When someone is calling someone neurotic, it's usually not a good thing. So I knew that. And other than that, I had no idea like exactly what does it mean to experience higher or lower levels of neuroses. That is essentially what assertive and turbulent is. It's not as clear cut as saying like if you came back as an A, you're assertive, then you don't have neurosis at all. Versus if you're a T or a turbulent type, then that's just all you are. Like neither of those is accurate. We are all a mixture of sometimes neurotic, sometimes not neurotic. And it's a spectrum, moment to moment, that we slide along. And so even somebody that is highly assertive, meaning they don't really suffer from neuroses, and we're going to get into a little bit what that means, that doesn't mean that they won't have moments. And same for a turbulent type. That doesn't mean that there aren't situations where you do feel confident in yourself. So just because you're more likely to experience higher patterns of neurosis doesn't mean that that's like exclusively where you're at. And immediately my thought process was back in 2015, 2016, back when I very first found Myers-Briggs, like I'm pretty sure I was already testing as assertive. But I think about like when you define neuroticism, it basically means excessive worry, rumination, stress, anxiety, depression, pessimism, emotional volatility, emotional instability due to a sensitivity to negative emotion, and that you basically have a higher level of reactivity when you experience negative emotion. Another way to say exactly the same thing is to say you have a very low tolerance for negative emotion. Would be like you are experiencing higher patterns of neurosis equals a lower tolerance for negative emotion, meaning an assertive person doesn't have fewer negative emotions, they have a higher tolerance for negative emotions. They understand that stress is part of the deal, that you're going to hit a challenge, you're going to hit a roadblock, and it's going to stress you out, or maybe you're going to worry about it a little bit, but you trust in the end, you're going to figure it out. You're going to land on your feet regardless of the circumstance. You're going to find something inside of yourself that solves the problem, or you're going to learn something new that you can add to your inside self that will solve the problem. So being assertive really is just a trust in yourself that says, I can figure this out. And that really painted a picture for me immediately where I was like, I feel like to a big extent, I've healed my neurosis. I don't know if that's the way to say it. I don't know if that's even a thing, but I am definitely so much more positive, so much less stressed than I used to be. I don't ruminate anymore. I definitely used to. So that tells me, like, just through my own personal lived experience, that it is absolutely possible to kind of like unravel neuroticism, like if you tend towards that direction, which Turbulence is saying you do. That doesn't mean you're stuck over there, and there are ways to bring it back. And so this is really what I wanted to get into as far as like the takeaway, the point of how do we actually work with this information to get something out of it that moves us in a 1% better direction towards our own true nature. So like the advantage to being assertive is that you are less likely to perceive threats in the present moment or in the future. There's just less things that are threatening to you because there's a greater sense of stability, and the greater sense of stability exists because no matter what comes, whether it's a positive emotion or a negative emotion, I know I'm going to figure it out. And that's that inner stability piece that when you're having more assertion, less neuroticism, that's what's there. And so the question becomes like, how do you build up your self-trust? How do you build up that inner sense of stability of being able to figure out whatever comes up? Because the downside of being turbulent is that you're more likely to find danger in the world. Like you're more likely to find things that you need to worry about, that's more what is present in your reality. And then you spend a lot of extra time worrying and stressing and having anxiety. And all of that energy are huge battery drainers as far as like a giant distraction from anything positive that you actually want to do with your life. And anybody who's suffered from anxiety and depression knows what I'm talking about. Like, it's debilitating. It's hard to do that and live a positive, happy, fulfilled life at the same time. So it really does beg the question, like, how do you help ease the suffering of neuroticism? And so I found a couple articles. I listed them in the description box. If you guys want to look through them, feel free. But I'm going to go through 8 things as far as how to help ease the suffering of neurosis. The first one is a belief that I know I adopted it and my life got a lot easier. It's not required. This is entirely optional, but it's a big one. And that is deciding to believe that negative emotions are normal, that they're a part of everyday living, that to sometimes feel good and sometimes feel bad doesn't mean that anything has gone wrong. In fact, it means your guidance system is working perfectly, just as you intended it to, so that it can tell you hotter, 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 colder, 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 so that you can navigate towards where you were trying to go. So this is a quote that I absolutely love, which is, pain is guaranteed, suffering is optional. Another way to say it, negative emotions are guaranteed. They are a natural, normal part of being alive, but suffering over those negative emotions is entirely optional. If you believe that negative emotions are normal, then there's really nothing to suffer over. There's only an identification of what's present inside of me right now is anger. What's present inside of me right now is fear or self-doubt or whatever it is, but that's not who I am. That's just the energy that's present right now. It's a messenger. It came to tell me something. So negative emotions are normal. Number 2, practicing mindfulness and other emotional coping strategies. Basically, just like we talked about last week with the work, it's like suffering is not coming from the world. Suffering is not even coming from what happens to us. Suffering is coming from what we're thinking and believing about what's going on in the world and what's happening to us. So when we get lost in our minds, when we get lost in our thoughts and our own fears about things, we're leaving the present moment. We're abandoning the right here, right now in favor of paying attention to the version that's going on in our mind, our fear-based thinking, our spiraling inside of ourselves. When we're paying attention to that, we're not paying attention to the right here, right now, present reality. And so being in the right here, right now, basically instantly relieves all suffering. Because when you think about right here, right now, I have my breath, I have this chair, I have a roof over my head, I have food to eat, I have water to drink, I'm okay. Like there's nothing going on at this right here, right now moment, except for maybe what I'm thinking and believing inside myself while I'm sitting here totally held and supported in this moment. So when my mind leaves the present reality, I suffer. And learning how to bring the mind back into the present reality is basically what mindfulness is. And there's lots of different ways to practice that. Meditation, yoga, music, dance. There's tons of different ways that we can practice being present in the moment. Number 3, I loved this one because, again, it's basically what we talked about last time, which is challenge and question your thoughts. And the ones that cause you to suffer, evict them immediately. Replace them, upgrade them to thoughts that help you to feel content and safe and secure and loved and held and connected, joyful, content, satisfied, fulfilled. There are such rich emotional experiences that are available to us humans. And to think thoughts that cause you suffering is leaving all the delicious food on the buffet and only taking the nasty, rotten, growing mold food. And like, why are you eating that? Why are you thinking thoughts that make you suffer? Question them. Is it even true? Is it real? Do I know that this is actually what is real? Or is this a picture that is, conjured in my mind that I'm reacting to in this moment? Number 4, learning to better express our feelings in constructive ways, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is extremely helpful for working through what's coming up. When we bottle our emotions because they are not acceptable, we can't present them because they are unacceptable. That's a level of self-rejection that, like, at that point right there, you have deviated from your true nature, which is giving you the emotional experience you're having. And when you decide to stuff it instead of express it, you stepped away from your true nature in that moment. And at that point, your true nature's coming for you. So it's gonna come out. Like, if you've ever erupted after bottling your shit for way too long, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the more you're bottling it, the less stable you are, because there's just unprocessed crap like clogging up your vessel. So the more you can get it out, like talk it out, whether to a therapist or a friend or even to a quiet room where nobody else is physically present, the act of talking and telling your stories and your experiences and expressing the emotions that are inside of you is the 1% turn, or the 1 degree turn towards a deeper level of self-acceptance. And I think that's essentially what self-trust is like, I know I'm not perfect. I know I have lots of weaknesses, but I'm really well versed in those areas, so I know when to ask for help. And then I'm also really well versed at what I do bring to the table, so that if I see somebody struggling with something where like, that's my expertise, let me jump in and offer my services. They can say yes or no. But like, I know I can help with these things, and I know that I ask for help when I run into these things. So again, it's like trusting that I can land on my feet no matter what the circumstance. Number 5 is journaling, which I absolutely love. I feel like journaling has saved my life many, many, many times. Journaling for self-reflection, journaling slows down the frequency of your energy to a pace where you can actually be with what you're feeling. It's not just an attack of intensity of emotions. Like when you force it to slow down and come through the handwritten word, you're like, I'll hear you, but you have got to work at my speed. And again, it's like you and you coming together to work together so that your emotions can be expressed, and they have to sit and wait and come forward in a pace that can keep up with your hand. And if there's a level of frustration in journaling, I think that again goes back to kind of like just being hard on ourselves in general, maybe a little bit of perfectionism in there, some other things. Like kind of a key sign of turbulence is being frustrated with yourself, which is kind of the opposite of accepting yourself. So I think in that moment, it's like even possible to like, I saw somebody use this trick the other day. They had different things in their hands, but you could do the same thing. So like you could have in one hand this little baby of your emotions, and it's like a literal baby. It's like wrapped up. It's so cute. And then in this one is your physical human self. And it's like still little, but like, you know, got some clothes on, and like it's got its shit together. It's got a pen. It's ready to write some stuff down. And you're like, okay, so you guys are going to work together to express my emotions. And emotions, you're going to have to slow down a little bit because I want to hear you, but you got to talk at a pace where I can listen. And human self, don't stop writing until they're done talking, okay? Okay. Break. So I don't know if that helps, but I do think that slowing ourselves down on purpose, no matter how frustrating that is kind of the point. To be able to actually see what's going on and get a distance where we can look at like really what is it that we're thinking and believing in this moment. Because, you know, if you want to expand your beliefs or acknowledge the belief that the suffering is coming not from the outside world or the circumstance, but from what I'm thinking and believing. So if that's really true, then when you journal, you get to look at what's causing your suffering. You get to put it on paper where it's just like super clear that like, oh, that's what I believe. And yeah, I could see where if that's really how the world is, I can see why I'd be suffering. I can see why I'm powerless in that situation. And the fact that I feel powerless must mean it's not true. Number 6, therapy. And I have been to many therapists in my life. I've also had friends that were very therapist-like in the way that our friendship unfolded. So I don't think it's absolutely necessary that it be a therapist, but depending on the level of turbulence, like the level of excessive worry and self-judgment and frustration, like if you're really, really in the thick of it, I would say like some kind of external person is probably going to be helpful, and probably a licensed professional. Just because like when you're dealing with your wounds, like, ow, like it's possible to re-traumatize some of those wounds or like rip scabs off of things. That's like, no, scabs on there for a reason, just let it be. So I think the licensed professional when you're getting into sensitive territory is absolutely a good way to go if you absolutely can. Number 7 is evaluate habitual behaviors. Kind of like our thoughts, like questioning our thoughts, like question our behaviors. You know, what is our diet? And I don't just mean our food, but I do mean our food. Like what are we eating? What are we putting into our body physically? But also what are we putting into ourselves mentally? What are we putting into ourselves emotionally? What are we putting into ourselves spiritually? And realizing that all of that, every ounce of all of that is impacting us. So evaluating our habitual behaviors and eliminating the ones that cause suffering. And she gave a couple examples. This was from a video that's in the description, where she said basically like evaluating your habitual behaviors and then creating proactive problem solving. Her example was, and she's a P type, but her example was that she procrastinates a lot and she's very disorganized. And then she'd be trying to do things at the last minute, like how a P type does. And she's disorganized and has procrastinated way too much for the last moment. And then she is overwhelmed in anxiety. She's exploding emotionally because her stress levels are too high. And so at that point, evaluating that, I think it's not that I'm an anxious person. I think I'm a disorganized person, and my tolerance for stress can only take so much. So either procrastinate fewer things right up until the last minute, or get organized so that you can do more efficiently at the last minute, maybe all of the above. But don't just let the pattern of being disorganized, procrastinating to the last minute, and then repeating that cycle of being overwhelmed and drowning in the last minute, which is tearing up your system. I can't even imagine. And then doing it over and over and over. Like, number 8, add more fun. Add more fun. More fun, enjoyable activities to your life. Basically, when people have patterns of high levels of neuroticism, most of your thoughts are negative in frequency, meaning they don't feel good when you're thinking them. So as much as you can, like making those 1% turns, those 1 degree turns towards more fun. So maybe that's like, one afternoon a week, I go to my favorite nature spot and I sit there with my journal for an hour and I make a gratitude list for a whole hour. And that's like my neuroticism free zone. Like this is fun only. And maybe it's not even an hour. Maybe it's 5 minutes. Maybe it's, 5 minutes every day. Maybe, wink, wink. But it's like, how can we carve out more fun time on purpose? Fun, as much as I understand it, like, and again, this is very much my own personal experience, but fun is not random. The people who have fun are the people who are trying to have fun. So it's like when you have high, and I remember from when I had high levels of neuroticism, meaning I was mostly depressed, anxious, fidgety, manic, so self-isolated, like just lifeless almost. Like that was my normal state. Like I was either, yeah. And it's like I would just tell the story that like I'm just a negative person. And I realize now that that was only true at that time because I allowed myself to spin in my existing thought patterns. I didn't question my thoughts. I didn't question my beliefs. I took my conditioning and I ran with it. And I'm over here and I'm like, I'm a negative person. That's what I got going on. That's who I am. And then the Myers-Briggs strengths section found me. And I see, I have things that I'm good at. Ooh, that feels way different than like what I'm spinning in over here. Seeing myself as valuable? Really? I have redeeming qualities? I'm not a total piece of shit, just kind of a piece of shit. That feels so much better. And it was like a portal opened in my world where now, I mean, I was only like 98% neurotic. And every once in a while I was like, ooh, maybe there's something different out there. So yeah, it's like 1% more, 1% more, 1% more, 1% more towards fun, towards lightheartedness. And again, we look at our worlds, and especially those of you who did fall on like the turbulent side, but really all of us, because like I said, everybody has their moments. And it's like, especially if you're gonna let yourself ruminate in something that's causing you suffering, is that really what you want? Can you take a break from the suffering for 5 minutes to like go have some fun and then you can go back to suffering? Or maybe you decide when you start having the fun that the suffering wasn't worth it. I'd rather just forget about that thing and just color in my paint by numbers. Like, Dude, like that's one of the things is like, the idle hands or the devil's playthings or whatever it is. It's like keeping yourself occupied with something that does not let the rumination happen. To just accept that I'm a negative person and I'm a ruminator, I invite you beyond that, because I don't think it's true for anybody. I think staying and swirling in our conditioning is always a choice, and feeling better, reaching for a thought that even feels 1% better is always a choice. And even if, like, literally, I spent probably like over 100 hours in those 5 months, like after I quit my software company job, before I started building Cecil K's, there was 5 months of being intentionally unemployed while I waited for the next step of my life to unfold. And talk about a lot of spare time to get going in the neuroses of like, what the fuck have I done? Oh my God, what's going to happen? And so I bought paint by number, and I colored them in. I just got off the subject. I dipped my paintbrush and I colored in the little thing. I dipped my paintbrush and I colored in the little thing. I rinse it out, dry it off, dip it in the next color, color in the whole thing for hours and hours and hours and hours, because I couldn't reach positive thought. And if I can't reach positive thought, then I'd rather have no thought at all. So let me sit here for 4 hours and paint this paint by numbers. Does it solve anything? No. But it definitely cuts my suffering short. And I don't have an answer for these things. Like rumination and worry and stress and neuroses even, like none of those are worthless. None of those things are without their purpose. Like it's good to worry about things sometimes. We protect ourselves. We take good care of ourselves. We keep ourselves safe when we worry about things. So like we don't want to just get rid of that. But when you're worried and stressed and anxious and depressed and suffering over things that you can't change, get off the subject. Get yourself a paint by number.